So Kevin Smith, if you were starting out today, would we know you mostly as a theatrical filmmaker or as a guy that makes content for the internet?
You'd know me as an internet beast, if anything. You know, that to me, before there was an internet, because when I saw Slacker again, it was like 1991. There wasn't an internet that was available to everybody, at least one that I knew of. I didn't really spend that much time at college, so I didn't have access to them. Had there been one, I would have probably gravitated toward that, because that's the medium that democratizes everything. Like, film was something you had to break into. You don't have to break into the internet, it's just right there. The only thing you have to do is kind of capture attention on the internet, and then that's up to you and your content and whatnot.
Exactly.
But film, when we kind of started with Clerks and whatnot, it wasn't there. It was a burgeoning indie film movement at that point. So people were interested in picking up these small movies and taking them to theaters like the Angelika, and there wasn't a lot of competition. You know, like there was enough. Like when we submitted to Sundance, there were 400 films submitted that year. Now Sundance probably gets 400 submissions in their first week, and I know they do over 2,000. At least they have to watch over 2,000 movies to figure out the whatever 14, 16 that they can let compete every year. So to be one of 400 in like 94 was pretty astounding. Like, that felt good. But everyone in town, and meaning this town, New York, had seen the flick. All the distribution houses, like Miramax had already seen it and passed. New Line, or Fine Line rather, had seen it and said, well, we'll wait and see. Who was it? Sony Pictures Classic, same thing. They were like, it's been done. So everyone had passed on the movie. By the time we went to Sundance in January of '94, it was just pretty much, let's enjoy the movie. Let's see, hey, we got picked. This is pretty damn awesome. But then it got scooped up. Miramax gave it a second try. Harvey Weinstein liked it a lot, and boom, we were kind of off and running at that point, man. But it's tough to make that kind of impact now.
Exactly.
Because
there's so much content on the internet.
Look at this camera right here. This camera, this Canon, is astounding. We used it on Red State. We did some of our chase sequences with it. This camera makes a better looking film than we ever could have made on our 16mm, our ARRI SR2 camera back in the day. Like, you'll make something that looks like a 35mm film on a camera like that. So the equipment is available to everybody. The technology has been democratized. Problem is, once you democratize technology and everybody could do it, everybody does do it. And once everybody is doing it, a lot more competition to stand out. Right. So it's tougher now to get noticed. It's ironically easier to get an indie film made and to be like, hey man, let's do this. Let's collect a bunch of friends and go out and shoot something. But it's a lot tougher than to stand out or pop that flick. And thank God I'm not trying to do what I did back then now, because I couldn't compete. Man, there are way funny people out there making very original comedies and whatnot. And you know, at that point, I had the idea of like, hey, let's curse more. Like, that was it. That's all I really brought to the game.
That was a conscious decision.
Well, to me, it was like I'd watch movies and I'd be like, this is horseshit, man. Nobody talks this cleanly. Like, I know people, I know my friends, I know my parents, everybody cusses. And I was like, nobody uses the vulgarity in movies that they kind of do in real life. And there's an eloquence to it. There's something beautiful, music, to hearing people kind of be able to let loose and curse. And not just like cussing's fun, but there's an eloquence to it. It's the parlance of those of us who don't necessarily go to or finish college necessarily. So I felt like, throw that in there, man, because that would look more like real life, or more importantly, that would sound like real life to me. If everyone's sitting around, you know, talking smack the way they do in the movies and whatnot, and mixing up discussions of Star Wars with discussions of sex or something like that, and kind of having people talk more frankly. That was what I was very into. And now, throw a rock and you hit that. Like, that happens all the time now in movies. And I'm not saying I birthed that, but in the beginning, there wasn't a lot of that. Or movies about dudes who just love each other but don't fuck. You know, like, you know what I'm saying? The marriage between single dudes who, like, are each other's life and soulmates, but don't necessarily, you know, have a romantic relationship. Or so that didn't really exist, and now that's everywhere, man. I got bromances up the ass, and much better ones than I ever made. Like, Judd Apatow knows how to take a bromance and make a lot of money off it. I never could. I was always like, there's a ceiling for this stuff, but I was wrong. You know, there's a way to mainstream it and do that in a language that speaks to more people. And number one, first off, you take a lot of that vulgarity out. You know, it's like the stuff that I was doing, still I think to this day, the cussing and whatnot, still makes some cats uncomfortable. Like, I remember going through studio notes when we were making flicks, like Mallrats particularly, where they were like, you will really creep the audience out with this much vulgarity, man. It's like a Red Fox party album. which will mean nothing to today's audience, but you know what I'm talking about. That was huge back in the day,
Yeah.
like incredibly filthy, incredibly vulgar. And I never understood that. Like I used to listen to Red Fox Party albums, and I was like, yeah, they're fun for that reason, because he's being honest. Like that's the thing in this world. If you ever wanted to stand out, and who knows if it'll change a few years from now, but this is the way it's always been up till now. To stand out in this horseshit spin world where people put gloss on everything and try to sell, and there's never anything sincere. All you have to do is be remotely candid. All you have to do is be willing to be the guy that goes out there. It's like, my dick's small, Bruce Willis didn't like me, and an airline kicked me off their plane. You know, if you're that honest with yourself and in your work and stuff, people tend to lean toward. You may not get everybody. You won't get everyone that shows up to a Steven Spielberg film, of course. But there are some people that are like, oh my God, this dude's actually saying something real or honest. I mean, I don't know how real it is, but at least it sounds kind of honest. Why would he make it up? And they tend to believe in your art just a little bit more than another.
What I find fascinating about your films, and I went back and looked at them again for this interview, you have real interesting and deep thoughts and philosophy and wisdom. And then you have the real bathroom humor, and in the middle you have some slapstick.
That's from Carlin. That's Carlin.
Carlin.
Man. Like that was the big George Carlin influence of my childhood. I saw him do Carlin at Carnegie on HBO when I was a kid. He was the guy that was not only hysterically funny, satirically brilliant, but he can also then flip and do dog farting jokes and stuff like that, and jokes about, like, you know, the Rice Krispies floating in the milk and stuff. So he can work here, he can work here, he worked everywhere in between, and he also felt free to curse like a sailor.
Yes.
And with a dude like that who's that hyper intelligent, you find him going like, yeah, I'm gonna elect to use this terminology.
And you elect to use that.
That's a choice.
And the scatology as well, the bathroom humor.
Absolutely, it's a choice.
It's
not compulsive, like I can't help myself, like Tourette's, where I'm like, I can't help myself, I gotta curse.
The comedian Danny Thomas used to say when he did Make Room for Daddy, he'd have some sort of real sentimental moment with the kids, and then he'd have a one-liner afterwards. He called it a treacle cutter.
Yes.
So you have all this philosophical stuff and wisdom, and it's really interesting stuff.
Yes.
And we're seeing into your soul, and then like,
you gotta
wow,
quick undercut it.
You gotta undercut it, and that's what that's for.
If it's too sweet, it runs the risk of becoming saccharine,
Maudlin.
giving people diabetes if it's too sweet. So what you want to do is you give them sweetness, but you gotta undercut it with reality, you know, or something funny. You know, sometimes if you get comfortable enough as a storyteller, you can leave a tender moment alone. You can let it exist by itself. But for years, if you watch everything I do...
Billy Joel.
I stole it right from him, from Billy Joel. He said that. He left a tender moment alone. He also sang Uptown Girl, if kids don't remember that. And we loved that single because his chick was in it. Remember his name, Christy Brinkley? And she was hot. And we were like, if a troll like Billy Joel could get a model like Christy Brinkley, there's hope for us all.
Essentially, that happened for you.
It did later in life, man. I pulled a Billy Joel. Got myself one of them tall chicks, walks around like Uptown Girl.
Kevin Smith, everyone. We could do this for hours.
We could. I could. You're a good guy to talk to. As much as you just let me go like this.